So, good morning. Let's take a deep breath. Shayla centered us into this sacred space in a beautiful way, but just to affirm, still the mind, open the heart, and be receptive to whatever needs to be heard or said. And if there are questions or whatever, I'm going to record. So, here's an animal blessing and something from Hawaii that I wanted to share. In Hawaiian culture, you do not call yourself your pet's owner. You are referred to as their kahu. The word holds deep meaning and is defined as the sacred role of a guardian, a protector, steward, or honored attendant. Essentially, someone who is entrusted with the safekeeping of something precious, something cherished. What a kahu protects is not their property. What they protect is part of their soul. We become better when we truly love an animal. We embrace the connection of all life when we embody what it means to be a kahu. So, my parents told me that I was fascinated with Egypt from the age of 3. They would find me asleep on issues of National Geographic magazine open to pages of Egypt. And then in 5th grade, I was permitted to cannibalize one of my uncle's magazines for a picture report for school. My teacher and classmates were puzzled by my choice of subject matter, as they tended to focus on family vacations or visits to our nation's capital. Years later in college, I recall a startling feeling when a history professor showed images of ancient Egypt. Chills covered my body as I felt a familiar pull of an ancient land. Traveling to Egypt was not something I expected as a young person, but it was always a dream. That dream came true in April of 1995 when my then husband and I joined a group from the ARE, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, Edgar Cayce Foundation. The ARE partnered with Guardian Travel, who have offices in Virginia Beach, and with whom I have likewise partnered for 18 trips to Egypt. 2.5 years after my first trip, in September of 1997, I knew a total lunar eclipse would occur on September the 16th. That would be visible at Giza in Egypt. The ARE had another trip planned, and I felt the call to return. My husband chose not to return with me in 1997 as we were preparing to move from Texas to Colorado. My dear friend and sister of my heart, Karen Cook, decided to make the journey, and we set off together, excited to learn what we would experience. I did not expect then that I would return 16 more times as a tour leader with Guardian Travel. The first evening, our tour group had dinner at the Mina House Hotel, which is located near the pyramids, when someone came into the dining room and called my name. I raised my hand, and the man came over with the phone. When I answered, our guide, Ahmed Fayed, was on the other end, sounding stressed. He said a woman from South Africa, who was part of this large group, wanted to stay at his house to view the eclipse. She was older, and he asked if I would be her companion, as he thought she might need company. So after getting the okay from Karen, I said I would be thrilled and I could then watch the eclipse from the amazing spot on their roof, which some of you have been. The next morning, our group of more than 60 were transported to the Giza Plateau for our visit to the pyramids and Sphinx. I was introduced to Lola Water from South Africa. Without prelude, she said, we need to go into the Great Pyramid together to prepare for the eclipse. We met later in the lobby and took a cab to the foot of the Great Pyramid. She ushered me up inside the pyramid and she performed a short ritual in the king's chamber. That experience introduced me to Lola's strong personality. Later, at about 7, we were collected from the Mina house with our luggage and driven to the home of Ahmed Fayed and his wife, Ratiba El Gabri. We had a lovely dinner with Ahmed, and the friendship with him that had begun on my first trip deepened. He visited me and my husband twice more in Colorado. He considered Hugh Lynn Casey, Edgar Casey's son, to be his second father. And he and Ratiba, in fact, named their daughter Sally after Edgar Casey's mother. Ahmed traveled through the U.S. every year to speak and promote his Egypt tours. Later, at about 7, we were um, After dinner, Lola and I climbed to the rooftop of the Fayed home to watch the stunning lunar eclipse, gazing east as the moon rose with the monuments of Giza in the foreground. At one point, Lola opened her mouth to speak just as the sound and light show began with a trumpet blast. It seemed as if the sound had come from her as a pronouncement, and we roared with laughter. We spent the night together in the guest quarters with a private bath and twin beds. Ahmed's home is directly across from the Giza Plateau. While preparing to retire, Lola unfolded a large section travel bag that was organized with all sorts of items. I was amused, as I had a similar travel organizer that I had yet to unpack. I laughed and said, "You must be a Capricorn." "I am a Capricorn," she replied in her South African accent. As I unfolded my nearly identical bag, she looked amused and we both laughed. We looked at each other and both felt this meeting was not random. "When is your birthday?" she asked. "January 13th. "My birthday is January 13th," she said with increased emphasis. And so began a remarkable friendship. We learned later in the tour that we both had been told by psychics that we would meet someone significant on the trip who would play a major role in our lives. We rose early the next morning to catch a plane to southern Egypt to rendezvous in Luxor with the rest of the group who had flown south the previous evening. As we boarded the plane in pre dawn darkness, I looked up at the full moon, which shone like a brilliant beacon slowly setting in the west. After takeoff, Lola and I looked outside the plane windows at a spellbinding vision. As the sun rose and the plane ascended, the sun and moon were like guardians of the east and west. Because a lunar eclipse happens at a full moon, we could see the sun rising in the east and the full moon in opposition setting in the west. At that moment, they were in perfect opposition, the sun on our left and the moon on our right as the plane flew south. The aircraft seemed to be exactly juxtaposed between the two orbs, as if the sun and moon were guiding and guarding as we flew over the Nile and the spine of Mother Africa. The two of us felt suspended between the two luminaries, as if in a benediction. We were transfixed, and that powerful event set the stage for the rest of the journey. "No one else seems to notice this fantastic event," I said. "They must already be dead," Lola answered. A wonderful part of the tour experience was a 4-day cruise on the Nile, sailing south from Luxor to Aswan. Kevin Tedeschi, the representative from ARE, led us in a guided meditation on the cruise ship. The ship had a large auditorium, like a theater with stadium seating. Kevin gathered us all in this room and offered this journey, a sort of meditation, where he gave us suggestions for visualizations while we were in a deepened and relaxed state. He said we might have a vision of a past life or learn something important about our time in Egypt. As we cruised south on the Great River, I entered a deep state of trance. As we closed our eyes and entered a relaxed state, he suggested we imagine that we were approaching a temple. I had a clear vision of walking down a long causeway to a temple that I later realized was Abydos. I experienced myself as a priestess in Egypt long ago. I wore a white gauzy dress and carried an alabaster jar that I held in front of me in both hands at the level of my heart. As I approached the temple, I saw two tall, upright white lions with piercing blue eyes who communicated with me telepathically. I felt a strong sense of recognition and familiarity in this powerful experience. The structure was at the height of its glory, and as I approached, I knew I would soon take part in an important ritual. I walked with sacred intent and holy purpose up the long causeway to the temple, holding an alabaster jar that was filled with frankincense oil. The causeway was lined with tall palm trees that swayed in a gentle breeze. My long, filmy robe brushed the ground as I walked, and a faint scent of the oil that had leaked onto my fingers filled my nostrils. Two great white lions stood upright at each side of the temple entrance and stared at me through fierce and brilliant blue eyes. Their snow-white fur glistened in the afternoon sun. As I approached the temple, I straightened my posture and slowed my gait so the guardians would not find my service wanting. As I came near, I tried not to shiver. I held their gaze, looking at each of them in turn, and they communicated a telepathic greeting of welcome and sacred purpose. These beings radiated silent power, strength, and courage. They were not verbal, but telepathically communicated qualities and concepts that inspire and empower. At that point, our guide slowly called us to return from our trance, so I did not learn what would have taken place inside the temple that I felt was Abydos. I was profoundly moved by the experience, and days later, when we visited the alabaster factory, I was able to buy a jar that had an uncanny similarity to the one I carried in the vision. I still have that vessel that holds dried jasmine blossoms from that trip. 11 years later, in 2009, I met the white lions again before another amazing trip to Egypt. But that is another story. After the amazing experiences in Egypt in September of 1997, Lola Water invited me to visit her in South Africa. My husband and I flew to Johannesburg in 1998 at the time of spring equinox in the northern hemisphere, while down under it would be autumn equinox. Lola took us from one end of South Africa to the other in a fascinating and mind expanding journey. Once in Johannesburg, we stopped at a traffic light when a motorcade drove through. Inside were Bill Clinton and Nelson Mandela. That was an astonishing historic moment to witness. We went to a New Age festival in Johannesburg and heard Deepak Chopra speak to a crowd of more than 1,000. One of the places that she took us was a game preserve called Umlati in the area of Timbavati, part of the title of my talk. But before we went there, she took me to have two audiences with Vishnamazulu Credo Mutwa, who died in March of 2020. Credo Mutwa was a Zulu Sangoma, their word for shaman, a traditional healer from South Africa. Credo lived with his wife, Virginia, in Kuruman, where they operated a hospice clinic. His several books draw on African mythology, traditional Zulu folklore, extraterrestrial encounters, and his personal encounters. His most famous book is Indaba, My Children. In 2018, he was honored with an award presented by the South African Department of Arts and Culture for his work in Indigenous wisdom. I was profoundly honored to have two meetings with Credo to learn about African astrology. When he spoke to me, I became transfixed by metal sculptures that lined a half wall behind him. When I asked about the sculptures, he said, which he had crafted, those are examples of star beings who had been visiting the Sangomas of South Africa for at least 60,000 years. The last story he shared gave me cold chills and brought back my vision of the white lions in Egypt in sharp relief. And quote in Credo's words, 4 centuries ago, at a place called Timbavati, there was a great chieftainess called Numbi. She had grown old and was losing her power. One day, a bright light filled the sky and came to the ground. This was a ship from the stars. Beings with large eyes and heads could be seen inside. The star beings took Numbi inside the vessel and flew away. After some amount of time, they returned. When Numbi came out of the craft, she had become young again and had much wisdom that the beings had given her. After that time, white animals began being born there. They were not albinos, and they had blue and sometimes green eyes. This, he said, was the beginning of the star lions of Timbavati. Credo came forward toward the end of his life to share the secret star lore of indigenous Black Africans in an effort to unite thinking people around the world and diminish the severity of their prophecies. Credo was a master storyteller who traveled to more than 20 countries sharing his wisdom. His openness resulted in great personal loss, and his son was brutally murdered by those who wanted him silenced. The Dogon tribe of West Africa has also shared startling knowledge of Sirius and its white dwarf companion that we call Sirius B. This is well known thanks to the work of Robert Temple in his book, The Serious Mystery. Credo Murtwa affirmed that this knowledge is but the tip of the iceberg. Indigenous knowledge of stellar relations is vast and complex, often dwelling at the heart of sacred ceremony. Rich oral traditions, including protocol for contact and how to distinguish friendly off-Earth visitors from those who are potentially harmful, has been handed down from one Sangoma to the next for many, many thousands of years. According to Credo, in every language in Africa, the meaning of star is bringer of knowledge or bringer of enlightenment. And Credo has traveled the continent of Africa sculpting haunted images of visitors from the stars that were described to him by African shamans. Cradled in South Africa's Kruger National Park lies a private game reserve called Timbavati, of which the smaller one, Umlani, was where we visited. This emerald jewel of the African bush is almost mythical in reputation because white lions are born in Timbavati. Credo told me this wonderful story about Numbi and how this white light came from the stars. The standing stones of Timbavati that were brought from Zimbabwe to honor Numbi's visitors are reminiscent of megalithic sites around the world, which give mute testimony to the power and antiquity of the site. I stood among these stones at the March equinox in 1998, the beginning of autumn in the southern hemisphere. The stones have a resonant quality that ring when struck with a smaller stone, like some Egyptian monoliths. Adjacent to Timbavati is a powerful and enigmatic place known as Manyaleti, which means gateway to the stars. A community of nearly 30 shamans lives there. In Credo's book, he relates a prophetic vision. He sees four great leaders emerging in the world: red, black, white, and yellow. The colors are the same as the Lakota medicine wheel and the races of humanity. These leaders will work together to save the planet, to unite us. One of these, a female leader, will arise in America, and she will be called the Red Savior because of her fiery nature. We might all now know who that might be. Lola took us to the Timbavati Game Preserve. No hunting occurs here. Rather, it is a sanctuary for animals and the humans who ride in big vehicles to see them in their natural state. We slept in small indigenous style adobe huts with mosquito netting on our beds that were like hammocks. Sunrise and sunset tours to see the animals in brilliant sunsets, nighttime around a campfire, looking up at southern constellations, where we did indeed see the Southern Cross for the first time, as Crosby, Stills, and Nash have said. While staying at Timbavati, I was gifted with another amazing experience. My friend Lola had arranged for me to have a session with Maria Gosa, a Shangoma, in which she threw the bones. This is an oracle reading by an indigenous shaman. We sat on the floor of the circular structure that was a central gathering place at the Timbavati Lodge. Maria spread a blanket and placed her bag of bones and other objects that she had acquired, and each of which had a symbolic meaning in the context of her reading. Being with her was a powerful experience. I was unaware of her stature across South Africa as well as Credo's at the time of my meetings. Otherwise, I think I would have been intimidated. She's also called the Lion Priestess and is recognized as a great being, and I felt an honor to have met her. She threw the bones for me, and with the help of a translator, she told me I had work to do and I would need to be strong. I did not know then how much that work would later be connected to Africa, the North and the South, the Sphinx and Timbavati, and that my whole life had prepared me for the task. Although I have made 18 journeys to Egypt, I have not been back to South Africa. While researching the material for the current book I'm writing about the lions, I discovered the work of Linda Tucker and the Global White Lion Trust. She's written two books, Mystery of the White Lions and Saving the White Lions, and has a global effort like Paula's, in her case, to save and protect, especially the white lions of South Africa, which had been hunted to nearly extinction or kidnapped and taken to zoos or put into exceedingly evil cuddle and kill programs. And it has been this woman's mission to save them. In her first book, Linda Tucker tells her own story of meeting Maria. She was raised in South Africa, and her family made annual trips to Timbavati. In 1991, she was living in Europe as a successful high fashion model and struggling in her marriage. She came to Timbavati to take some time off to gain clarity. She knew the staff there from childhood and the guides, and Timbavati was a place of peace for her. One evening, a guide suggested, since it was a dark new moon, that they go out for a late ride to look at the stars, and several guests joined them. After going quite far from the lodge, the engine died in the vehicle, and the battery failed in the radio. Soon, they were surrounded by a growling pride of lions. People were terrified, and the guide tried to calm them, as their fear was making the situation worse. After some time, they saw a small African woman walking toward them with a child in each hand, baby strapped to her back. As she approached the lions, they sat down and became quiet. She gave the guide a radio, and they were saved. This was none other than Maria Gosa. In Linda Tucker's own words, quote, "On November 10th, 1991, a near-death experience changed my life forever. I was rescued from an angry pride of lions by an indigenous Shangaan medicine woman, Maria Gosa, who is also known as the Lion Queen of Timbavati. Subsequently, I gave up my life in fashion and advertising in Europe and returned to Africa to make sense of this bizarre and miraculous intervention. I found Maria, who became my shaman teacher, and with her, I embarked on an extraordinary journey of discoveries. Mystery of the White Lions brings together nearly a decade of research to shed light on the significance of the white lion, believed to be the most sacred animals on the African continent. This was a life-changing moment for Linda Tucker. She returned to Europe, tried to pick up her life, but couldn't let go of the experience. The message from Credo, Maria, and the Star Lions of Sirius, and all indigenous elders, is that we need to end our war, to take care of the earth, and to learn to live with each other in harmony on this precious planet that is our home. And I'm now writing the most difficult book I've ever written. Last part of my story, because all through it, I'm saying, why me? Why me? Should I be writing this story? And when I got back from Egypt the last time in October, we got back on a Saturday night, and the next morning in early morning darkness, I was awakened to see and feel at the bottom of my bed two powerful feline deities from ancient Egypt, Sekhmet and Mafdet, who said, "You will write this book." And what I know, and Linda talks about it, there's a line that goes down the spine of Africa, right through the Sphinx, all the way through the gold mining, all the way through Timbavati to the very tip of Africa. And I have been told in trance that beings from the star system Sirius have been involved with this planet for nearly 500,000 years, and that 36,000 years ago, the lions and the star lions and the crystal people came to found the civilization of Africa, and that the Sphinx is an honorarium of one of the white lions. Its head was recarved later into a pharaoh. Say it again, Michitaki Owaisen, all our relation.